We're talking today very specifically about how thoughts drive our emotions. And so I got some notes, so I'm probably going to be flipping a little bit between my screens here to make sure I can see my notes and give you the information that I'm hoping to share with you today. So welcome again to my Past to Doctor live stream on Twitch as we talk about thoughts that directly drive our emotions. Now, with that in mind, one of the things that I like to do in starting shower thoughts is just start with a verse. Romans 12:2 says, "Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect." And now the reason I bring up this verse is because this verse, even if it's not something that would normally be advertised or talked about, is the verse that very specifically speaks to a realm of therapy known as cognitive behavioral therapy. And I bring that up because what we're going to be talking about today has a lot to do with CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT is a very simple but profound and important and valuable vein of therapy that basically states, the idea behind it is the way you think impacts the rest of your life. The way you think impacts your behaviors. The way you think impacts your emotions. The way you think has a huge impact on the direction of your life overall. And there is a pastor I like to listen to, Craig Groeschel. He says you're always moving in the direction of your strongest thoughts, which is very much a cognitive behavioral therapy idea. And so we're talking today about how thoughts directly drive our emotions, how they shape our overall emotional well-being, because the brain cannot easily distinguish between imagined threats and real life experiences. Your interpretation of situations triggers a corresponding physical sensation and emotional response. And so we're going to talk a little bit about understanding this mind-body dynamic and how we can break those negative cycles to improve our mental health. So first, we're going to start with how this connection works. It begins with what we call the thought, feeling, action loop. Thoughts trigger an emotional response. Now, in turn, that emotional response fuels our behavior. So, for example, maybe you're dealing with a problem in your life and you've convinced yourself that you're never going to find a solution, you're never going to get it right. That leads to a feeling of defeat or a feeling of failure. And remember, I always say failure is an event, not a person. That causes you to avoid tasks around what it is you're trying to accomplish, which reinforces the initial negative thought. I'll give you a personal example. For years, I was told when I was in high school and after that I was a terrible student. In all fairness, I was a terrible student, but it wasn't because I was stupid, it was because I was lazy. Big difference. But I was told I was a terrible student. I had a counselor in high school tell me not to bother taking the SATs because college wasn't for me. I believed that. And so for years, I didn't go back to school. I eventually did. I did a little bit of junior college and did poorly. Then I did a non-accredited Bible college program and I did okay. But I didn't go back to school because I was convinced that I wasn't a student. Eventually, after I started getting help for my mental health struggles, I did go back to school. And when I went back to school, I went all the way through getting finished my bachelor's, got 2 master's degrees and a doctorate. Because I wasn't a bad student. I wasn't ready, or I was lazy, or whatever it might be. But I allowed that thought, feeling, action loop. I had a thought that I was a bad student that triggered emotions of failure and defeat, which caused me to not want to go back to school. But the thing is it goes beyond that. It turns into a physical reality for us. Emotions are energy, right, in us, and they manifest real physical chemicals in the body. So a stressful thought immediately spikes cortisol and adrenaline, causing a physical reaction like a racing heart. It signals anxiety to your brain. It can trigger an anxiety attack. And so there's a physical reality that comes from our thoughts. And then this turns into our perception overriding reality. The objective situation then matters less than our interpretation of it. For example, maybe the situation is bad, but it's not as bad as we think it is. But we think it's so bad that our interpretation takes our mind to go beyond the actual situation that's taking place. And so this thought, feeling, action loop. And then what happens is this can show up in a lot of other ways. So maybe we have a thought, I'll never quit smoking. And so we might feel like we have no self-control. And so what do? We smoke more. And then it makes the situation worse. It almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, I'm not saying all this because we should minimize the difficulties we're facing. I'm not saying this because we should cast aside or pretend that a difficulty isn't really difficult, or that our thoughts about it are in any way invalid. All I'm trying to do at this moment is communicate to you and remind myself, because I need this reminder, that our thoughts are powerful. And our thoughts feed our emotions, which feed our behaviors. And that thought, feeling, action loop can be very negative and can over time cause much greater consequences than the situation we're actually facing. And so I'm just bringing all of this up to give you kind of a baseline for what we're talking about today, and this reality about how our thoughts can directly impact our overall emotional well-being. So let's talk about the impact on well-being. Positive emotional well-being gives you the tools to adapt to life's stressors and process our emotions constructively. That's called resilience. However, if we have a negative emotional well-being that grates on or eats away at our resilience and makes us less able to adapt to life stressors, makes it more difficult for us to process emotions constructively. And now I'm going to bring up one of my favorite big words, neuroplasticity. There was a time when doctors and scientists thought that our brains became set by a certain age, right? You reached maturity, 18, 20, 25, whatever number you want to put on it, or whatever number science wants to put on it. And when you reached that point, your brain was done growing, you were done developing, and that was that. Well, scientists have learned that that is not true. Our brains have the amazing ability to adapt and grow throughout our lives. And they call this neuroplasticity. And our brain physically wires together the pathways we use the most. Now, that can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. This is how we develop habits. This is how you learn a new language, or how you learn anything for that matter. It's how you remember things. Now, if you repeatedly rehearse negative thoughts, negative self-talk, that will create pathways that become your habit. And you will habitually go back to those negative thoughts, that negative self-talk, because you've built that pathway. Think about, it's an illustration from a book. I can't remember the name of the book. But think about, back in the day, they used to have carts, right? People didn't have cars. They had horse-drawn carts with thinner wooden wheels. And they would drive those carts down roads, and when it would rain or over time, it would wear ruts in the road. Well, everybody would use those ruts because it kept your cart going the direction you wanted it to go. And over time, those ruts would get deeper and deeper and deeper. That's how neuroplasticity works. Now, if we are training our brain with negative talk, negative thoughts constantly, those pathways in our brain will get deeper. They will become more ingrained. They will become easier for us to go back to. That negative thought, those negative thoughts become our habits. At the same time, if we positively create those pathways, if we take advantage of the brain's neuroplasticity and we make positive or positive thoughts and positive self-talk our default, it becomes easier and easier and easier over time. It's harder at first because we are rewriting pathways in our brain. And if we're used to going directly to the negativity, then it's a lot harder to go to the positivity. But over time, if we make positive thoughts our default, those pathways in our brain will become stronger, and we will have, over time, those ruts develop into the way that positive thinking will become our default. Now, positive thinking does not mean that we will never have a negative thought or that nothing bad will ever happen to us. That's not true. That's not how life works. But this is what happens in our lives. And so you think those thoughts, it affects your emotions, and that affects your behavior. And so I've used some very generic examples, but maybe if you take a little time and do a little self-reflection, you can see how this works in your own life. Maybe you have a bad interaction with somebody you're close to. So you start thinking negatively about that relationship. That brings up maybe fear of abandonment, or it brings up anger towards the other person, or whatever emotion comes out of that. Then as a result of that emotion, you start behaving differently towards the other person. Maybe that happens at work, or it happens with a spouse or significant other, or it happens with a good friend, or who knows, right? That's just another example of how that thought feedback loop shows up, the thought, feeling, action loop. So this is reality for a lot of people. I know it's reality for me. I struggle with negative thinking and negative self-talk all the time. So how do we get out of it? Well, we gently retrain our thought patterns to alter how we feel in order to build emotional wellness, right? We use that thought, feeling, action loop to our advantage. In other words, we take what's been working against us, negative thoughts leading to negative emotions or leading to negative behaviors, and we replace that. We're still the same loop, but we're going to work on having positive thoughts that lead to positive emotions that lead to positive behaviors. And there's a couple ways we can do that. One we're going to spend a lot of time on. One is called the catch, check, change method. This is a cognitive behavioral therapy, or a CBT method, where we become aware of our unhelpful thoughts. We check to see if they're based on facts or assumptions, and we actively reframe them into realistic perspectives. Like I said, we're going to talk more about that in a moment, so I'm not going to dive too deep. You can pause and breathe. Breathing, well, it's important. We would die without breathing. But breathing intentionally, breathing with a purpose, is something that we don't always do. Allow yourself to sit with and observe emotions without reacting to them and without judging them. You can use the boxed breathing technique. I've brought that up in previous streams because boxed breathing is huge. You breathe in for the count of 4. You hold for the count of 4. Breathe out for the count of 4. Hold for the count of 4. And you start over by breathing in for the count of 4. While you do that, you can observe your emotions, but don't react to them, right? What are you feeling in that moment? Are you feeling anxious? That is a great technique to deal with anxiety. Are you feeling fearful? Great technique for that. That breathing technique actually resets our nervous system to help get us out of anxiety. But if you do that while focusing on a negative thought or emotion that you're dealing with in the moment, but do so without reacting. In other words, you're not going to commit some kind of action, right, or behavior as a result of that emotion or that thought. And you're not going to judge that emotion or that thought. Let it be there. Embrace it for a moment. Accept that it is what it is. But pause, breathe, observe without reaction or judgment. Another one is to simply utilize the resources. And you've heard me, I've kind of preached on this a little bit in the past. If you're feeling overwhelmed by negative thoughts, get help. Do some research, find a therapist, talk to somebody you trust. Whatever it is, get help. Don't live there. That is not where you are meant to live. So let's come back to the 3C method. It's a way to identify and reframe negative thought patterns. Catch it, check it, change it, is the way that it can be phrased. Catch it, check it, change it. 3 C's. Now it involves actively catching automatic thoughts or thought distortions, evaluating their evidence, and then replacing them with a balanced perspective to improve emotional well-being. Sorry, my dog is trying to get underneath my desk, and he's such a sweet boy, but he likes to sit by me when I'm doing stuff here. These are core techniques of CBT that can help you break negative thought loops. So we start with catch it. This is where you identify the pattern. Awareness is the first step to stopping negative thoughts. Here's a couple of ways you can try to catch it. Automatic thought records, right? Jot down the situation, your immediate motion, and the negative thought that comes with it. And you can keep a small notebook nearby you. I think I have some. Hold on. I got to move off camera for a second. I know I have some. Okay, I thought I had some. I might have told you a lie. I didn't mean to. Oh, I didn't tell you a lie, I promise. These are fantastic, right? You can get a bundle of them on Amazon for like less than $10, and they're flimsy. You can roll them up, you can fold them, you can put them anywhere, and just grab one of these and carry it around with you. When a situation happens that you notice triggers a negative thought or negative emotion, write it down. What was the situation? My boss yelled at me. My girlfriend sent me a nasty text, or boyfriend, or whatever. I'm not going to create too long of a list, but jot down the situation, what happened. Let's go with my boss yelled at me. What was your immediate emotion? Maybe fear, maybe anger, maybe frustration, right? Just write it down. What is your negative thought? I'm terrible at my job, or my boss is a jerk, or I'm never going to do any better than this place, or whatever it might be. Just write it down. Do that for a period of time, and over time, you're going to notice the situations that trigger specific emotions and thoughts in you. And when you notice this situation or these types of situations trigger these types of emotions and these types of thoughts, then you begin to identify your triggers. And when you identify your triggers, you're going to know when one happens, and you're going to be able to stop the spiral into negative thought and behavior before it even begins. Okay? So thought records, hugely important. Look for distortions. Identify specific thought distortions, like catastrophizing, assuming the worst. My boss yelled at me. Clearly, I'm going to lose my job, and I'm going to lose my home, and everybody who I know is never going to talk to me again, and I'm going to have to declare bankruptcy, and I'm going to end up living in a box under a bridge. That's catastrophizing. And I know that sounds like an extreme example, but I've done things like that. I've let my thoughts go that far, right? Then we have like polarizing, which is black and white thinking. It's either good or it's bad. Some things are either good or bad. Some things are a little more gray, right? And I'm not necessarily talking about a truth versus a lie. I'm just talking about the way we're thinking about a specific situation. My boss yelled at me. I'm going to lose my job. This is horrible. Or I'm really bad at my job. I should be fired, right? That's black and white thinking. Instead of, well, maybe my boss is having a bad day. Maybe it wasn't really my fault. Maybe there's something I can do to fix it, right? That puts us a little more in that gray area. Or we have personalizing, blaming yourself for things that are completely out of your control. My boss is having a really bad day, found out that his wife was having an affair or her husband was having an affair, or right? Came to work today and I messed up on that memo. My mistake really wasn't that big of a deal, but my boss took it wrong and freaked out on me. And maybe you go talk to your boss, go, hey, I know you're going through a rough time. Sorry, I made that mistake. I'm going to correct it. It can be, we can allow these distortions to get us. One of the ones that I tend to use is mind reading. I assume I know what the other person is thinking. So instead, I try to ask. I just try to be clear. Hey, when you said this, it kind of hurt my feelings. What are you thinking? Because what came into my mind is that you hate me and you think I'm terrible at my job. And the person might go, no, I don't hate you. I had a really bad night, or I had a really bad day, or this is what's going on, and it really wasn't your fault at all. But you're not going to know that if you don't have those conversations. But then you can also notice physical cues. Remember, we're still in catch it, identifying the pattern. Notice your physical cues. Pay attention to what happens in your body based on the situation, your emotion, and your negative thought. And you can even write this down in your thought record. So, right, the situation happened, your immediate emotion, say it was fear, and the negative thought, I'm terrible at my job, and what happened? My heart started racing, or I started having an anxiety attack, or I felt tightness in my chest, or I immediately got a headache, or my neck felt really tense, or I got a stomach ache, or whatever it is. You can write that down too. And then what happens when you learn to identify these patterns, you learn to identify the triggers, and what to expect is going to come after those triggers. You can identify it early on, and you can take a different path. It takes work. It takes effort. It's not easy, but you can do it. I know you can because I can, and you're at least as smart as I am. So catch it. Identify the pattern. Second, check it. Evaluate the evidence. Challenging the automatic thought by literally questioning its accuracy, questioning its validity, like you're going to interrogate your own thought. So ask yourself a few things, right? Fact versus feeling. Is the thought based on concrete facts or just your anxious emotions, right? So we're going to do evidence, and we've talked about this, right? What is the evidence that the thought is true? And there might be some. What is the evidence that the thought is false? And I guarantee there will be some. And once you check those facts, you can go, okay, so there is some evidence that it's true. There's a lot more evidence that it's false. I'm really reacting to my emotion, not the facts of the situation, right? You can go back to your thought journal. Go, okay, I've had a situation similar to this happen before, and this is what I felt, and this was the negative thought, and this is where I felt it in my body. All right, but when that happened, this was the evidence in that situation. So now I'm going to check the evidence in my current situation. And the evidence in my current situation says that I am reacting to my emotions, not the facts. So we're checking it. One of the ones I love that I've had people use on me or tell me to use is the friend test. If a very good friend of yours called you or texted you or came over to talk to you, or you sat down to have a cup of coffee or something, and they told you the situation you're in, they told you what was going on, and they told you how they felt about it, right? And it's your thoughts. What would you say to them? Right? So be your own friend, be your own advocate in that moment. And what would you tell that friend who was in your situation? Then you have to ask yourself, is that what you're telling yourself? Because quite often, a friend in that situation, you're going to say, hey, man, you're not that bad at your job. Or, yeah, maybe you made a mistake, but you're not bad at your job. You're not a failure. You're not an awful person. You're not a whatever it might be, whatever negative thought is intruding in your brain in that moment. You're not these things. I know you better than that. What you really are is a hard worker who maybe made a mistake, or you're a hard worker and your boss was way out of line. Maybe you need to talk to him. Hey, there's my dog again, or whatever it might be. But what would you tell your friend? Then turn it back around and tell yourself that. That's a positive thought that's going to start creating new pathways in your brain that can eventually become habits. And then just start considering alternate perspectives, right? So we caught it, we're checking it. Facts versus feelings, friend test, checking the evidence. Now, what are the alternate perspectives? Are there other ways to view the situation? Right? Keep harping on a bad interaction with a boss because it's working for us. I know my boss is going through some personal stuff, so I'm going to try not to take this personal. I know it probably wasn't really directed at me. Or maybe it is. My boss is just kind of a jerk and he's in an especially bad mood today, so it's not me he's angry at. That's just his personality. What are other ways you can look at that situation? And I'm just going to tell you something. This is a bit of free advice. I don't usually give advice, but don't ever have serious conversations through text or email. Ever, 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 ever. Don't do it. You lose facial expressions, you lose body language, you lose tone of voice, you lose the ability to look into the other person's eyes, right? Texts and emails are for information only, never for having an emotionally charged discussion. Things get blown way out of proportion and it never works. It never works. But maybe you just need to have a discussion with that person. And so maybe you send them a text to set up the discussion, but always have the discussion in person. So first we're going to check it, or we're going to catch it. We're going to find out those automatic thoughts and identify the patterns. Then we're going to check it. We're going to look for evidence for and against what's going on. Then we're going to change it. We're going to reframe that thought or replace that thought. So once you dismantle the negative thought, right? You've found the evidence, you've identified the trigger, you've identified the emotion, you know what's going on. You're going to swap it for a balanced, realistic alternative, right? You're going to neutralize or reposition it. So you're going to replace a thought like, I ruin everything with, I made a mistake, but I have fixed problems like this before. So let's go back. Instead of, I'm a horrible employee and my boss hates me, you're going to replace that with, my boss is having a bad day. This really isn't my fault. Right? Neutralize or reposition the thought. Mindfulness. Practice observing your thoughts without judgment so you don't instantly react to them. And we talked about that a little bit ago with pausing and breathing, but use some mindfulness. Get yourself in the moment, not in the past or some possible future that you don't know about yet or that you might try to create, and just observe your thoughts without judgment so you don't instantly react to them. So with that being said, I want to take a few minutes, and we're not going to be on too much longer, but thank you for the one person who stuck with me the whole time. We're going to talk about the benefits of all that we've talked about so far. Positive thinking directly improves mood by triggering the brain to release feel-good neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. And how do we know this works? Well, most, not all, but most antidepressants are serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SRIs or SSRIs. There's another S in there, but I don't remember what it means. But what do? They literally make your brain release serotonin to help deal with depression. But the production of serotonin and dopamine, dopamine is the feel-good thing, right? When you eat a chocolate chip cookie, dopamine is what is released. There's a lot of other ways dopamine is released, but we're sticking with the chocolate chip cookie for today. But when you think positively and your brain releases serotonin and dopamine, it simultaneously lowers stress hormones like cortisol. It literally has a physical effect on you. The shift in mental perspective fundamentally impacts emotional wellness through several key mechanisms. The first is biochemical changes. Optimistic and happy thoughts physically alter your brain chemistry. The production of serotonin promotes feeling calm, emotional stability, and well-being while elevating your mood. But you have to keep in mind that the opposite does the same thing. Negative thoughts release cortisol, which makes you feel anxious, reduces stability, reduces your feelings of well-being, and lowers your mood, right? So we want to be intentional about this. We want to be mindful about it. And I'm not telling you, that if I'll use an example that I've had brought up to me before, like the loss of a loved one. When you lose someone who's close to you, that person dies. It's really hard to have positive thoughts about them dying. It really is. And I'm not telling you shouldn't feel sad or angry or grieve in any way. You absolutely should. It's healthy and it's good for you. But something you can do to help you get through that is to try and recall happy memories about that person, because that will produce serotonin, which will help you feel calm and stable, will increase your well-being and elevate your mood. Right? So it's not that you dismiss the grief or you pretend that what happened isn't horrible. Absolutely. You lost somebody you cared about. But if you recall a positive memory about that person, it can still trigger those biochemical changes. Thinking positively can enhance emotional regulation. Positive thinkers generally find it easier to reframe stressful situations rather than spiraling into helplessness. Individuals who focus on the positive tend to concentrate on solutions, resulting in less anxiety and sustained emotional balance. So let's talk about this word emotional regulation. I have a hard time with emotional regulation. I have for a long time. I'm doing much better now than I used to. But emotional regulation is something hits, right? Bad situation hits. You have an emotional response to that situation. How quickly you come back to a place of emotional stability, that is your ability to emotionally regulate yourself. Yes, we do live in quite a world. That is very true. Emotional regulation allows you to quickly reframe a stressful situation. As soon as you can return back to a normal emotional state, or whatever your normal emotional state is, all right, because normal is a funny word. We all have a different place that we would call normal. But you have to get back to that place in order to concentrate on solutions and reduce anxiety. The faster you do that, is the faster you can become emotionally regulated. Now, for me, for a long time, I was terrible at emotional regulation, right? I was just awful. I would have a negative thought that would lead to a negative emotion, and I would spiral into behavior that was destructive, usually involving food for myself, but would involve other things as well. And it would take me sometimes weeks to get back to emotional regulation. With time and with more therapy, it went from weeks back to days. Yes, overthinking was a huge part of why I would have a hard time being emotionally regulated. And why a lot of people have a hard time being emotionally regulated. So, but with time and therapy and practicing the things we've talked about today, I would go from weeks to days. And days was still bad, right? That I would be emotionally dysregulated for days. I would be stuck in a thought pattern that would be leading to negative emotions. Well, now, by God's grace, by some amazing therapists, and a lot of practice on my part, it's usually hours or sometimes even less. And it all has to do with those 3 C's we talked about. I understand my triggers, so I catch the thought early. I then will check the evidence for that thought, and then I'll change it or reframe it. And so the more you do it, the more you put that into practice, the faster you will be able to return to a state of emotional regulation. And that is very healthy for all of us. The third thing is increased resilience, right? Negative thoughts decrease our ability to be resilient in difficult situations. Emotional regulation, positive thoughts, reframing our thoughts, finding those patterns, all the things we've talked about for the last almost 40 minutes will increase our resilience. It will allow us to view setbacks as temporary challenges rather than insurmountable obstacles. That builds resilience. It allows you to bounce back from difficult situations faster. And it allows you, increased resilience allows you to protect your mood against lingering or chronic stress. It's incredible what happens. And I know you might be thinking, oh, this is all just the power of positive thinking. Yeah, there is power in positive thinking. There is power in understanding your own worth before God. There is power in understanding that with some practice, with some repetition, you can take these negative thoughts, you can take these negative emotions and learn to deal with them in a way that will be a lot more healthy for you, that will be a lot more positive in your life, that will be a lot more beneficial to you, and not just your emotional or mental well-being, but your physical well-being over time. It's so important and so valuable. And so there is power in positive thinking. God bless you too, brother. Thank you. There's so much power in this. There really, really is. That's why we started with that scripture way back at the beginning. Romans 12:2, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. When we change our thoughts, we change our lives. We will change the direction of our lives. We will change our general mood. We will change the way we interact with other people. We will change the way we handle difficulty and adversity and struggles. We will change the way we view ourselves, the way we view ourselves before God. Our lives will change. Building a positive mindset takes time and practice. Now, I'm telling you all of this, but I want you to understand my mental health journey. When I realized I was struggling with mental health, I was in my early 30s. I mean, I had for a long time, but I didn't know what to call it before then. And then I started going to a therapist, and eventually I took antidepressants for several years. But I'm approaching 50. I'm 49 years old. I turned 50 later this year. I went from my early 30s, it wasn't until I was in my mid to slightly later 40s that I started getting good at this. So I want you to think about that. It took me the better part of 15 years. Now, I'm not saying it's going to take you that long. I really hope it doesn't take you that long. I hope you are much quicker at it. Now, part of the reason it took me that long is I didn't practice it as often as I could have or should have. But the more you practice it, techniques like the things we talked about, journaling, practicing gratitude, mindful reframing of negative thoughts, catching the negative thoughts by using like the thought record we talked about, checking it for the evidence and changing it, reframing it or replacing it. The more often you practice that, the faster you will get better at it. But don't expect the first time you do it that it's going to work and you're never going to have another negative thought or another problem. It's not true. You will have other negative thoughts and other problems. It's going to happen. But the more you practice it, the better you'll get at it. And as you do that, you will significantly enhance your ability to deal with these negative thoughts, to deal with the emotions that arise from the negative thoughts, and to reframe them to get you back on track to a place of emotional regularity much, much sooner. So with all that being said, I've had a couple, another viewer pop in here very recently. You might have to go back and listen to the whole thing to kind of get where we're at. But before I let you go, if anybody's got any questions or thoughts or something you'd like to talk about or share in the chat, let's do it. That's what we're here for. And I would love to hear from you and talk with you about whatever's on your mind. So, anybody? I kind of feel like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I don't know if anybody listening is old enough to remember Ferris Bueller's Day Off. But there's a scene in that movie where a teacher's calling Bueller's name and he just keeps going, Bueller, Bueller. The actor is Ben Stein, by the way, one of my favorite actors back in the day. Awesome comedic actor. was in a lot of really good stuff. Played some really amazing characters, but that's a tangent, and I don't want to go off on a tangent at the moment. So I'm still hanging out. Anybody have any thoughts? Anything anybody wants to throw in there? If not, that's okay. If you came in a little late, I really want to encourage you to listen to the whole thing. We covered a ton of stuff in 43 minutes. We really did. We covered just a bunch of things, and I would love for you to have the benefits of all the stuff we talked about. We talked about the thought, feeling, action loops, how thoughts lead to feelings, which can lead to behaviors. We talked about the physical realities of difficult or negative thoughts and negative emotions. We talked about how to deal with them with the catch it, check it, change it method, which is a cognitive behavioral therapy method. And so, yeah, if you're joined a little bit later, I just encourage you, head on back, take a listen to the whole stream. A lot of really amazing, useful information. I'm going to give a shout out. I'm not sure quite how you say it. EDOTOPG, Edotopage. I probably pronounced that terribly, but thank you for following my channel. I really appreciate it. Thanks for showing up in the chat. That was fantastic, and I always love to know that somebody was here and somebody was listening, and hopefully this was beneficial to you. So with that being said, I hope you have an awesome rest of your day and an awesome rest of your week, and we will see you next time.